Caesar Augustus, Part IV of the Lives of the 12 Caesars, by Gaius Suetonius Tranquillus. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lenny. The Lives of the 12 Caesars, by Gaius Suetonius Tranquillus, translated by Alexander Thompson and edited by T. Forster. Caesar Augustus, Part IV. Of his clemency and moderation there are abundant and signal instances. For, not to enumerate how many and what persons of the adverse party he pardoned, received into favour, and suffered to rise to the highest eminence in the state, he thought it sufficient to punish Junius Novatus and Cassius Patavinus, who were both plebeians, one of them with a fine, and the other with an easy banishment, although the former had published, in the name of young Agrippa, a very scurrilous letter against him, and the other declared openly, at an entertainment where there was a great deal of company, that he neither wanted inclination nor courage to stab him. In the trial of Aemilius Aelianus of Cordova, when, among other charges exhibited against him, it was particularly insisted upon that he used to calumniate Caesar, he turned round to the accuser, and said, with an air and tone of passion, "I wish you could make that appear. I shall let Aelianus know that I have a tongue too, and shall speak sharper of him than he ever did of me." Nor did he, either then or afterwards, make any farther inquiry into the affair. And when Tiberius, in a letter, complained of the affront with great earnestness, he returned him an answer in the following terms: "Do not, my dear Tiberius, give way to the ardour of youth in this affair, nor be so indignant that any person should speak ill of me. It is enough for us if we can prevent any one from really doing us mischief." Although he knew that it had been customary to decree temples in honour of the proconsuls, yet he would not permit them to be erected in any of the provinces, unless in the joint names of himself and Rome. Within the limits of the city he positively refused any honour of that kind. He melted down all the silver statues which had been erected to him, and converted the whole into tripods, which he consecrated to the Palatine Apollo. And when the people importuned him to accept the dictatorship, he bent down on one knee, with his toga thrown over his shoulders, and his breast exposed to view, begging to be excused. He always abhorred the title of lord, as ill-omened and offensive. And when, in a play, performed at the theatre, at which he was present, these words were introduced, "O just and gracious lord," and the whole company, with joyful acclamations, testified their approbation of them, as applied to him, he instantly put a stop to their indecent flattery, by waving his hand, and frowning sternly, and next day publicly declared his displeasure in a proclamation. He never afterwards would suffer himself to be addressed in that manner, even by his own children or grandchildren, either in jest or earnest, and forbade them the use of all such complimentary expressions to one another. He rarely entered any city or town, or departed from it, except in the evening or the night, to avoid giving any person the trouble of complimenting him. During his consulships he commonly walked the streets on foot, but at other times rode in a close carriage. He admitted to court even plebeians, in common with people of the higher ranks, receiving the petitions of those who approached him with so much affability that he once jocosely rebuked a man by telling him, "You present your memorial with as much hesitation as if you were offering money to an elephant." On Senate days he used to pay his respects to the conscript fathers only in the house, addressing them each by name as they sat, without any prompter. And, on his departure, he bade each of them farewell, while they retained their seats. In the same manner he maintained with many of them a constant intercourse of mutual civilities, giving them his company upon occasions of any particular festivity in their families, until he became advanced in years and was incommoded by the crowd at a wedding. Being informed that Gallus Tyrrhenius, a senator, with whom he had only a slight acquaintance, had suddenly lost his sight, and under that privation had resolved to starve himself to death, he paid him a visit, and by his consolatory admonitions diverted him from his purpose. On his speaking in the Senate, he has been told by one of the members, "I did not understand you," and by another, "I would contradict you could I do it with safety." And sometimes, upon his being so much offended at the heat with which the debates were conducted in the Senate, as to quit the house in anger, some of the members have repeatedly exclaimed, "Surely the senators ought to have liberty of speech on matters of government." And Titius Labeo, in the election of a new Senate, when each, as he was named, chose another, nominated Marcus Lepidus, who had formerly been Augustus' enemy, and was then in banishment, and being asked by the latter, "Is there no other person more deserving?" he replied, "Every man has his own opinion." Nor was any one ever molested for his freedom of speech, although it was carried to the extent of insolence. Even when some infamous libels against him were dispersed in the Senate house, he was neither disturbed, nor did he give himself much trouble to refute them. He would not so much as order an inquiry to be made after the authors, but only proposed that, for the future, those who published libels or lampoons in a borrowed name against any person should be called to account. Being provoked by some petulant jests which were designed to render him odious, he answered them by a proclamation, and yet he prevented the Senate from passing an act to restrain the liberties which were taken with others in people's wills. Whenever he attended at the election of magistrates, he went round the tribes with the candidates of his nomination, and begged the votes of the people in the usual manner. He likewise gave his own vote in his tribe as one of the people. He suffered himself to be summoned as a witness upon trials, and not only to be questioned, but to be cross-examined with the utmost patience. In building his forum, he restricted himself in the site, not presuming to compel the owners of the neighboring houses to give up their property. He never recommended his sons to the people without adding these words, "if they deserve it." And upon the audience rising on their entering the theatre, while they were yet minors, and giving them applause in a standing position, he made it a matter of serious complaint. He was desirous that his friends should be great and powerful in the state, but have no exclusive privileges, or be exempt from the laws which governed others. When Asprenas Nonius, an intimate friend of his, was tried upon a charge of administering poison at the instance of Cassius Severus, he consulted the Senate for their opinion what was his duty under the circumstances. "For," said he, "I am afraid lest, if I should stand by him in the cause, I may be supposed to screen a guilty man, and if I do not, to desert and prejudge a friend." With the unanimous concurrence, therefore, of the Senate, he took his seat amongst his advocates for several hours, but without giving him the benefit of speaking to character, as was usual. He likewise appeared for his clients, as on behalf of Suetonius, an old soldier of his, who brought an action for slander. He never relieved any one from prosecution but in a single instance, in the case of a man who had given information of the conspiracy of Murena, and that he did only by prevailing upon the accuser in open court to drop his prosecution. How much he was beloved for his worthy conduct in all these respects, it is easy to imagine. I say nothing of the decrees of the Senate in his honor, which may seem to have resulted from compulsion or deference. The Roman knights voluntarily and with one accord always celebrated his birth for 2 days together, and all ranks of the people yearly, in performance of a vow they had made, threw a piece of money into the Curtian lake as an offering for his welfare. They likewise, on the calends of January, presented for his acceptance New Year's gifts in the Capitol, though he was not present, with which donations he purchased some costly images of the gods, which he erected in several streets of the city, as that of Apollo Sandaliarius, Jupiter Targoides, and others. When his house on the Palatine Hill was accidentally destroyed by fire, the veteran soldiers, the judges, the tribes, and even the people individually contributed, according to the ability of each, for rebuilding it. But he would accept only of some small portion out of the several sums collected, and refused to take from any one person more than a single denarius. Upon his return home from any of the provinces, they attended him not only with joyful acclamations, but with songs. It is also remarked that as often as he entered the city, the infliction of punishment was suspended for the time. The whole body of the people, upon a sudden impulse, and with unanimous consent, offered him the title of Father of his country. It was announced to him first at Antium by a deputation from the people, and, upon his declining the honour, they repeated their offer on his return to Rome, in a full theatre, when they were crowned with laurel. The Senate soon afterwards adopted the proposal, not in the way of acclamation or decree, but by commissioning Messala, in an unanimous vote, to compliment him with it in the following terms: "With hearty wishes for the happiness and prosperity of yourself and your family, Caesar Augustus, for we think we thus most effectually pray for the lasting welfare of the state. The Senate, in agreement with the Roman people, salute you by the title of Father of your country." To this compliment Augustus replied, with tears in his eyes, in these words, for I give them exactly as I have done those of Messala: "Having now arrived at the summit of my wishes, O conscript fathers, what else have I to beg of the immortal gods but the continuance of this, your affection for me, to the last moments of my life?" To the physician Antonius Musa, who had cured him of a dangerous illness, they erected a statue near that of Aesculapius, by a general subscription. Some heads of families ordered in their wills that their heirs should lead victims to the Capitol, with a tablet carried before them, and pay their vows, because Augustus still survived. Some Italian cities appointed the day upon which he first visited them to be thenceforth the beginning of their year. And most of the provinces, besides erecting temples and altars, instituted games to be celebrated to his honor, in most towns, every 5 years. The kings, his friends and allies, built cities in their respective kingdoms, to which they gave the name of Caesarea; and all, with one consent, resolved to finish, at their common expense, the temple of Jupiter Olympius at Athens, which had been begun long before, and consecrated to his genius. They frequently also left their kingdoms, laid aside the badges of royalty, and, assuming the toga, attended and paid their respects to him daily, in the manner of clients to their patrons, not only at Rome, but when he was travelling through the provinces. Having thus given an account of the manner in which he filled his public offices, both civil and military, and his conduct in the government of the empire, both in peace and war, I shall now describe his private and domestic life, his habits at home and among his friends and dependents, and the fortune attending him in those scenes of retirement, from his youth to the day of his death. He lost his mother in his first consulship, and his sister Octavia when he was in the 54th year of his age. He behaved towards them both with the utmost kindness whilst living, and after their decease paid the highest honours to their memory. He was contracted when very young to the daughter of Publius Servilius Isauricus, but upon his reconciliation with Antony after their first rupture, the armies on both sides insisting on a family alliance between them, he married Antony's stepdaughter Claudia, the daughter of Fulvia by Publius Claudius, although at that time she was scarcely marriageable. And upon a difference arising with his mother-in-law Fulvia, he divorced her untouched and a pure virgin. Soon afterwards he took to wife Scribonia, who had before been twice married to men of consular rank, and was a mother by one of them. With her likewise he parted, being quite tired out, as he himself writes, with the perverseness of her temper, and immediately took Livia Drusilla, though then pregnant, from her husband Tiberius Nero, and she had never any rival in his love and esteem. By Scribonia he had a daughter named Julia, but no children by Livia, although extremely desirous of issue. She, indeed, conceived once, but miscarried. He gave his daughter Julia in the first instance to Marcellus, his sister's son, who had just completed his minority, and after his death to Marcus Agrippa, having prevailed with his sister to yield her son-in-law to his wishes, for at that time Agrippa was married to one of the Marcellas, and had children by her. Agrippa dying also, he for a long time thought of several matches for Julia, and even the equestrian order, and at last resolved upon selecting Tiberius for his stepson. And he obliged him to part with his wife, at that time pregnant, and who had already brought him a child. Mark Antony writes, that he first contracted Julia to his son, and afterwards to Cotizo, king of the Getae, demanding at the same time the king's daughter in marriage for himself. He had 3 grandsons by Agrippa and Julia, namely Gaius, Lucius, and Agrippa, and 2 granddaughters, Julia and Agrippina. Julia he married to Lucius Paulus, the censor's son, and Agrippina to Germanicus, his sister's grandson. Gaius and Lucius he adopted at home, by the ceremony of purchase, from their father, advanced them, while yet very young, to offices in the state, and when they were consuls elect, sent them to visit the provinces and armies. In bringing up his daughter and granddaughters, he accustomed them to domestic employments, and even spinning, and obliged them to speak and act everything openly before the family, that it might be put down in the diary. He so strictly prohibited them from all converse with strangers, that he once wrote a letter to Lucius Vinicius, a handsome young man of a good family, in which he told him, "You have not behaved very modestly in making a visit to my daughter at Baiae." He usually instructed his grandsons himself in reading, swimming, and other rudiments of knowledge, and he labored nothing more than to perfect them in the imitation of his handwriting. He never supped but he had them sitting at the foot of his couch, nor even travelled but with them in a chariot before him, or riding beside him. But in the midst of all his joy and hopes in his numerous and well-regulated family, his fortune failed him. The 2 Julias, his daughter and granddaughter, abandoned themselves to such courses of lewdness and debauchery that he banished them both. Gaius and Lucius he lost within the space of 18 months, the former dying in Lycia, and the latter at Marseilles. His 3rd grandson Agrippa, with his stepson Tiberius, he adopted in the Forum, by a law passed for the purpose by the sections. But he soon afterwards discarded Agrippa for his coarse and unruly temper, and confined him at Surrentum. He bore the death of his relations with more patience than he did their disgrace, for he was not overwhelmed by the loss of Gaius and Lucius, but in the case of his daughter, he stated the facts to the Senate in a message read to them by the quaestor, not having the heart to be present himself. Indeed, he was so much ashamed of her infamous conduct, that for some time he avoided all company, and had thoughts of putting her to death. It is certain that when one Phoebe, a freedwoman and confidant of hers, hanged herself about the same time, he said, "I had rather be the father of Phoebe than of Julia." In her banishment he would not allow her the use of wine, nor any luxury in dress, nor would he suffer her to be waited upon by any male servant, either freeman or slave, without his permission, and having received an exact account of his age, stature, complexion, and what marks or scars he had about him. At the end of 5 years he removed her from the island where she was confined, to the continent, and treated her with less severity, but could never be prevailed upon to recall her. When the Roman people interposed on her behalf several times with much importunity, all the reply he gave was, "I wish you had all such daughters and wives as she is." He likewise forbade a child, of which his granddaughter Julia was delivered after sentence had passed against her, to be either owned as a relation or brought up. Agrippa, who was equally intractable, and whose folly increased every day, he transported to an island, and placed a guard of soldiers about him, procuring at the same time an act of the Senate for his confinement there during life. Upon any mention of him and the true Julius, he would say with a heavy sigh, "Aithophelon agamos temenai agonos tapoletai." Would I were wifeless or had childless died. Nor did he usually call them by any other name than that of his 3 imposthumes or cancers. He was cautious in forming friendships, but clung to them with great constancy, not only rewarding the virtues and merits of his friends according to their deserts, but bearing likewise with their faults and vices, provided that they were of a venial kind. For amongst all his friends we scarcely find any who fell into disgrace with him, except Salvidianus Rufus, whom he raised to the consulship, and Cornelius Gallus, whom he made prefect of Egypt, both of them men of the lowest extraction. One of these, being engaged in plotting a rebellion, he delivered over to the Senate for condemnation, and the other, on account of his ungrateful and malicious temper, he forbade his house and his living in any of the provinces. When, however, Gallus, being denounced by his accusers and sentenced by the Senate, was driven to the desperate extremity of laying violent hands upon himself, he commended, indeed, the attachment to his person of those who manifested so much indignation, but he shed tears and lamented his unhappy condition. "That I alone," said he, "cannot be allowed to resent the misconduct of my friends in such a way only as I would wish." The rest of his friends of all orders flourished during their whole lives, both in power and wealth, in the highest ranks of their several orders, notwithstanding some occasional lapses. For, to say nothing of others, he sometimes complained that Agrippa was hasty, and Maecenas a tattler, the former having thrown up all his employments and retired to Mytilene, on suspicion of some slight coolness, and from jealousy that Marcellus received greater marks of favour, and the latter having confidentially imparted to his wife Terentia the discovery of Murena's conspiracy. He likewise expected from his friends, at their deaths as well as during their lives, some proofs of their reciprocal attachment. For, though he was far from coveting their property, and indeed would never accept of any legacy left him by a stranger, yet he pondered in a melancholy mood over their last words, not being able to conceal his chagrin, if in their wills they made but a slight or no very honourable mention of him, nor his joy, on the other hand, if they expressed a grateful sense of his favours and a hearty affection for him. And whatever legacies or shares of their property were left him by such as were parents, he used to restore to their children either immediately, or, if they were under age, upon the day of their assuming the manly dress, or of their marriage, with interest. As a patron and master, his behaviour in general was mild and conciliating, but, when occasion required it, he could be severe. He advanced many of his freedmen to posts of honour and great importance, as Licinus and Celadus and others, and when his slave Cosmus had reflected bitterly upon him, he resented the injury no further than by putting him in fetters. When his steward Diomedes left him to the mercy of a wild boar, which suddenly attacked him while they were walking together, he considered it rather a cowardice than a breach of duty, and turned an occurrence of no small hazard into a jest, because there was no knavery in his steward's conduct. He put to death Proculus, one of his most favourite freedmen, for maintaining a criminal commerce with other men's wives. He broke the legs of his secretary Thallus, for taking a bribe of 500 denarii to discover the contents of one of his letters. And the tutor and other attendants of his son Gaius, having taken advantage of his sickness and death to give loose to their insolence and rapacity in the province he governed, he caused heavy weights to be tied about their necks, and had them thrown into a river. In his early youth, various aspersions of an infamous character were heaped upon him. Sextus Pompey reproached him with being an effeminate fellow, and Marcus Antony with earning his adoption from his uncle by prostitution. Lucius Antony, likewise Mark's brother, charges him with pollution by Caesar, and that, for a gratification of 300,000 sesterces, he had submitted to Aulus Hirtius in the same way in Spain, adding that he used to singe his legs with burnt nutshells to make the hair become softer. Nay, the whole concourse of the people, at some public diversions in the theatre, when the following sentence was recited, alluding to the Gallic priest of the Mother of the Gods beating a drum: Videsne ut Cinaedus orbem digito temperet? See with his orb the wanton's finger play, applied the passage to him with great applause. That he was guilty of various acts of adultery is not denied even by his friends, but they allege, in excuse for it, that he engaged in those intrigues not from lewdness, but from policy, in order to discover more easily the designs of his enemies, through their wives. Mark Antony, besides the precipitate marriage of Livia, charges him with taking the wife of a man of consular rank from table, in the presence of her husband, into a bedchamber, and bringing her again to the entertainment, with her ears very red and her hair in great disorder. That he had divorced Scribonia for resenting too freely the excessive influence which one of his mistresses had gained over him. That his friends were employed to pimp for him, and accordingly obliged both matrons and ripe virgins to strip, for a complete examination of their persons, in the same manner as if Tyrannius, the dealer in slaves, had them under sale. And before they came to an open rupture, he writes to him in a familiar manner thus: Why are you changed towards me? Because I lie with a queen? She's my wife. Is this a new thing with me, or have I not done so for these 9 years? And do you take freedoms with Drusilla only? May health and happiness so attend you, as when you read this letter you are not in dalliance with Tertulla, Tarentilla, Ruffilla, or Salvia Titicenia, or all of them. What matters it to you where or upon whom you spend your manly vigor? End of Caesar Augustus, Part 4.